Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Global Development. I'm Raj Kumar, the President and Editor-in-Chief here at Devex, and you're listening to a special edition of our podcast that we're calling Climate Plus. I'm on the ground in Baku along with my colleagues Jesse Chase-Lubitz and Ayanat Mersi to bring you behind-the-scenes coverage of the key issues and debates at this critical climate conference. You're going to get to listen in as we talk to some of the leaders that are shaping climate finance and its impact on health, food, and much more. If you're in Baku, we hope you'll reach out to us. Listen in as we talk to the leaders that are shaping this space and tell us what you'd like to hear.
Hi, I'm Kate Warren, Executive Vice President and Executive Editor at Devex, coming to you from COP29 in Baku. Today we're diving into the role of the private sector in addressing climate change, with voices from two leading companies. First, Bayer, a global company focused on healthcare and agriculture. Second, Mars Incorporated, the food services company that is the world's leading manufacturer of chocolate. There has been skepticism and debate over how or even if private sector companies should be part of these COP negotiations. Yet, leveraging public-private partnerships is heard over and over on the stages here at COP and other global convenings as the magic bullet for scaling climate finance and impact. So I spoke with two leaders who are trying to do just that. Matthias Berninger, EVP and Head of Public Affairs, Sustainability and Safety at Bayer, and Barry Parkin, Chief Sustainability Officer and Chief Procurement Officer at Mars. They both highlight the role the private sector can play in combating food insecurity and addressing climate change. They discuss what their companies are doing, from decarbonizing supply chains to improving agricultural practices to redesigning packaging. Matthias and Barry also stress the importance of private sector participation in COP29, which they hope can lead to more commitments and collective action from the private sector. First, let's hear from Matthias Berninger from Bayer.
Well, I'm here with Matthias Berninger, EVP for Public Affairs, Science, and Sustainability at Bayer. Matthias, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, Kate, we live in the same city and now we are pretty far away, about 9 hours ahead of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so what's funny about these convenings, you travel to the other side of the world often to meet with people who live in your same city, so we're definitely doing that today here at COP29. So, the private sector has a bit of a smaller presence this year, and there is some debate about what role the private sector should or can play in these conversations. So maybe can you talk about why Bayer is here and what you hope to both contribute to, but also get out of COP29 this year?
Yeah, we are a regular in this process, so we partake in a lot of these global UN negotiations. I, for example, spent quite a bit of time at the Biodiversity COP in Cali that was happening earlier in October. One of the reasons why we are here is that we have a huge contribution to make from the innovation that we have in our pipeline to decarbonize agriculture, the nexus of climate on the one side, health on the other side, food on the third is one that is squarely where we do business. We are also here because we are committed to an aggressive climate agenda. As far as Bayer is concerned, we are on course and determined to reduce our emissions in line with what has been agreed in Paris.
So, we mentioned we're both based in Washington, D.C., where we will have a new administration coming in soon that has been very kind of outspoken against climate action. We recently had an event with one of the members from the Heritage Foundation who called it the climate agenda, and that it's caused more harm than climate change has. So as you're thinking about pushing forward on your sustainability climate goals, how are you thinking about approaching this new administration that maybe is going to be, in some cases, hostile or at least not as embracing of climate ambition?
Globally, we serve more farmers than any other business in the world. We have a very good understanding of how they experience the changing climate. and they just can't have a reliable income when weather is unreliable, and their experience doesn't matter anymore. So vast majority of farmers tell us that climate change affects their livelihood, and that is true for large farms in the United States and for a 2-acre family farm in Ethiopia.
And what is your business case for investing in these issues?
Well, first of all, we have been investing in improving agricultural yields for a very long time. That is also one of the reasons why people who looked at inflation in central banks for the longest time really discounted agriculture, because somehow since the end of World War II, the agriculture sector grows at a rate of average of 2% every year. So we've been able to reduce the number of people who are facing extreme food insecurity. We have been massively reducing global hunger crisis as a result of our innovation agenda in the agriculture sector. Now, what we see is that with the temperature increases that we are seeing now, and the rate of temperature increase which is going up, it's going to be ever more complicated to deliver the kind of productivity improvements the world needs to grow without food inflation being a major headache. And it's a bit ironic that food inflation is one of the topics that played a significant role during the last election in the United States. I think that food inflation moves from a seasonal problem to a structural problem, and solving for that, having products and services that reduce food insecurity, that reduce food inflation, which everybody is facing, is of course also a good business.
Yeah, and we actually had a conversation last spring in DC where you talked about food inflation and kind of reframing the conversation around food insecurity to food inflation crisis, and that, you know, putting it in that context also describes how food also impacts health and how food inflation leads to less balanced diets. And you know, today is Food Day, tomorrow we have Health Day here at COP, and we work at the intersection of all three. So how do you think about your role in not only shaping food security, but also nutrition security?
Well, we know a lot about micronutrients for two reasons. One, we are not only a large supplier of corn seeds or of soybean seeds, we also have quite a few of the vegetables that we all eat in our portfolio. So chances are that everybody in the world at one point has eaten a tomato that stems from our seeds. So on the vegetable seed sides, we know a lot about micronutrients. We know about the micronutrient content, the fat composition content of major row crops. And with One A Day, we are also in the space of micronutrients in the supplement. Even more so, we are specialized with Elevate on some of the micronutrients that are specifically targeted, for example, for women who want to become pregnant, or are with child and lactating. So you have this huge knowledge in the micronutrient space, and I do agree that food inflation doesn't lead to a major hunger catastrophe yet, but there is a silent problem, and that's the lack of micronutrients, which is contributing heavily to stunting and wasting in a generation of baby boomers that is growing up in Africa right now.
So I want to talk about your food science and innovation. You've done a lot of innovations in seeds and looking at building drought-resistant crops and seeds that obviously help with both mitigation and adaptation goals. But there also is some pushback and controversy around whether you call it GMOs or other areas of food science. So kind of what do you think gets missed from that debate, and how do you look at those trade-offs?
We have around I want to say 5 years ago, started to look at our R&D budget through the lens of the many crises that we are facing. One of the things with the climate crisis that is often underestimated is how predictable it is. So we kind of know, for example, soil moisture in certain regions as a function of certain climate models. So what is the soil moisture in the Amazon at a 2 degree scenario, at a 2.5 degree scenario, at a 3 degree scenario? That helps us in the development of new crops. One thing that drives my optimism is that at the intersection of biology, chemistry and artificial intelligence, or if you want to put it in another row, AI for A, biology for B, and C for chemistry. So in this ABC interaction, a lot of magical things are happening at the moment. And we've seen that with the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, this year being awarded, amongst others, to Demis Hassabis, who is the CEO of DeepMind, also the leading AI expert at Google. So Bayer employed chemists since 1863. The periodic system of the element wasn't even in existence back then. So we know a thing or two about chemistry, and the transformation that we see in that space is huge. The same is true for biology. So that gives me hope that we can come up with innovative solutions that will solve in the adaptation journey for some of the problems, and also will help to decarbonize agricultural production. For example, tomatoes today are highly dependent on fossil fuels. When you eat a tomato, you also consume a lot of fossil fuels as a result of it, because of the heating in the greenhouses, because of transportation, but also because of the fertilizer you need. And we need to decarbonize the food sector. Now, the debate is a bit an either-or debate. Either agroecology or this modern biotech stuff that I've been just talking about. And one of the things both business and NGOs need to do, also as a consequence of the changes in many countries, including the changes in the US government we just touched upon, is we need to replace the word or with the word and. So for me, regenerative agriculture, which would be sort of the offspring of a love affair of biotech agriculture and agroecology or organic farming, is a way out of this. We have done research. It took us 5 years to get the data that indicates that regenerative agriculture practices that take the best out of both worlds have significant benefits for soil health, for biodiversity, and get us higher yields. So it is possible if we move away from the traditional fault lines to kind of make a difference.
So this COP is called the Finance COP, and I think it's been pretty clear from discussion and negotiations so far that you can't rely just on financing from governments. There's just not enough there, or not enough political will. So where do you see private sector fitting into that overall climate finance picture? Where do you think you can play a strategic role?
Yeah, so I think when you call something loss and damage, it's pretty clear that it's not going to fly. I think financing, climate financing, as a transfer from some of the very rich countries, but not China, for example, to the poorest countries in the world, is having a difficulty to fly. I think that even under other political circumstances in the US, these kind of very macro debates don't get you anywhere. What we need is we need to combine capital, innovation, regulation, and participation in a smart way. I do believe, for example, that you can find innovative ways to finance. We are part of a group of businesses that, in a coalition with the governments of the US, the UK, Norway, and Korea, have developed a program called LEAF, like the leaf on a tree. And that program has mobilized 1.5 billion to protect tropical rainforests. Why does business invest in that? Well, we get a bit of the carbon credits out of protecting a tropical rainforest, but we also, in addition to that, do something to preserve nature. For example, the forests in the home state of Belém in Brazil, where the next COP30 will take place, have been beneficiaries of that program. So this mobilizes quite a bit of money, and I think if we find creative solutions to mobilize both money and access to innovation, we solve for some of the climate financing challenges that we see. Otherwise, we run into difficulties. I'll give you another example. When the hurricanes hit the US, there was an immediate debate about crop insurance and what farmers in the US need to do to kind of get some of their investment in their crops addressed and made whole through crop insurance. When a drought hit the southern part of Africa this year, most people didn't notice this, but most importantly, the farmers in the southern part of Africa don't have crop insurance. So a very good climate adaptation instrument is to develop bespoke crop insurance programs for smallholder farmers. So I'd much rather like to talk about these kind of very concrete things than abstract financial transfers that will lead to a lot of debate, but much less action.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And when we talk a lot about public-private partnerships, it's often something people talk about on stage as a good idea, but harder to actually implement. And you, before being a bear and working more on the corporate side, were in the German Parliament. And what do you think? What do you think that the private sector needs to understand more about working with public sector and vice versa to make some of those partnerships actually get off the ground and see impact?
So when we work with international finance institutions, as one example, the World Bank Group or others, we really focus on what are their KPIs. And if you look at the latest scorecard of the World Bank, they have very clear KPIs. And then the second question is, can we positively contribute to them? So that's something where I think it's really important for the private sector to understand what are the policy objectives. Now I'm looking back at the fall meeting that happened early in October in Washington, D.C. of the World Bank Group. And what I found very helpful is President Banga's stronger focus on food and food insecurity. So moving from the abstract poverty to very concrete. That helps us, of course, to find bespoke programs that help to address that, especially focusing on smallholder farmers and on food systems to reduce, for example, one of the biggest travesties, which is like massive food loss. A country like Nigeria spends a lot of money importing food, including canned tomatoes, but has like a lot of tomatoes that are rotting on the vine or just after being harvested. It's pretty much mind-boggling to see that with your own eyes, and I think these kind of things we can change. Now, on the other side, I think I see a shift in the international finance institutions who no longer look for CSR-like programs. So more and more, it's very clear that the investment we are making needs to make good sense for us as a business. And I think that's a crucial part of how we need to rethink this. It's also important for NGOs. I haven't met an NGO that basically is critical of, let's say, a renewable energy company that invests in wind energy is making money with it. But somehow when you make money investing into smallholder farming communities, that's still like problematic. Yeah, so I think NGOs and also the banks need to be happy with people making money by solving some of our most pressing problems.
So what are you hoping to see happen this week at COP29 and this week ahead?
I think what would be really helpful also for the future of carbon markets, if we were able to land the plane, no pun intended, but it's also relevant for planes, when it comes to the fungibility or tradability of carbon removals. I see a huge potential in activating nature. I think nature is more efficient than most other carbon capture technologies. So I see huge opportunity in mobilizing nature to remove carbon. Of course, when you mobilize nature, this sometimes doesn't happen in the very country you are in, it happens somewhere else. And governments agreeing on these kind of investments being possible through a good mechanism that deals with the challenges, for example, that every country has to reduce their own emissions within their border. And of course, if I invest in another country as government XYZ, then the reductions are not necessarily happening in my country. So how can I account for those reductions is the big question. Now, dicey conversation. I think we made at the beginning huge progress in the space because the presidency was able to quickly kind of get a pre-decision about it. But I think it's important that we land the plane. This was a debate that started in Paris, should have been solved at a COP in Santiago de Chile that then didn't happen there, but it happened in Madrid. And ever since, it's sort of like a open question that is dangling around. So landing that plane would be really good. That's one example. The other thing, I think it's really important that COP stays on course of looking at adaptation and mitigation. In your very first introduction, you talked about adaptation and mitigation, but that's a new thing at COPs. That started in Sharm el-Sheikh. Before that, we only had mitigation-related conversations, but we have no choice but to look at adaptation and mitigation at the same time.
What we see is that the rising global average temperature, but also these more extreme weather patterns, they impact agricultural yields. There's going to be a real need now to optimize what we call climate smart agriculture, resilient agricultural practices.
How do we make sure these things are feasible, that they're implementable, and that they're giving farmers more access to the tools that they're going to need to adapt and become more climate resilient?
In a special edition of the Devex Climate Plus podcast, hear from CropLife International's Emily Reese and Lori Goodwin about how agricultural innovation and science can be key drivers in tackling climate change and building resilience in our food systems. Listen to Climate Plus wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's turn to Barry Parkin for Mars, which is in a unique position to take climate action as a family-owned business, not bound by a traditional shareholder model, meaning they can often take a longer-term view when it comes to their investment and business growth strategy. He'll discuss Mars' strategy for achieving a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Well, I'm here with Barry Parkin, Chief Procurement and Sustainability Officer with Mars. Barry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So we are here in the sidelines of COP29 in Baku, I guess in a old spice merchant building surrounded by carpets, really beautiful here. And we actually just had a conversation with one of your colleagues talking about water rights and sustainability and a lot of the work that you at Mars are doing at really embedding sustainability into your business processes and business practices. So maybe just to start off, can you talk about, as a company, how do you view sustainability as core to your values and way of operating?
Yeah, no, happy to do so. Well, Mars is a private family-owned business, a global food business. We operate, all over the world, and our origins go back over 100 years. And we trace the origins of sustainability back to a letter that Forrest Mars, who was the guy who built the business through the 1950s 40s, 50s, 60s. He wrote a letter to all the associates, the employees of Mars, in 1947, so just after the Second World War. And he wrote that the purpose of the company is to create a mutuality of benefits with all stakeholders. So he was writing about stakeholder capitalism in 1947. Imagine that. It's been the topic of the last 10 years. And he had recognized that, and he wrote, this is the sole purpose of the company. So what he had understood was that the business would only be successful in the long term if everybody we touched was also being successful. Suppliers, customers, he talked about competitors, governments, all as stakeholders that needed to be successful while we were successful. And of course we apply that to the environment and to the world in general. So that's the origin of what we're trying to do. We're trying to grow in harmony with the world.
So you mentioned you're a family-owned business, and I think a lot of the challenges for some corporations to invest in sustainability is when you're looking at the next quarter reporting to shareholders, if it's going to take a while to see return on that investment, it can be harder to make that business case. As a family-owned business, you won't necessarily have some of those same dynamics. So how do you see that influencing the way you approach sustainability?
Yeah, we did some work with the owners, the Mars family, a few years back, and aligned on a set of goals for the business, which we call the Compass. And four goal areas. One was about strong financial performance, one about quality growth, about how set up we are to grow, one about trusted partnerships, and one about positive societal impact. And the decision the owners made was these four things are equally important. And that is a breakthrough moment, because they're saying basically that greenhouse gas reduction is as important as earnings. And that sets the platform for then doing great things. They also recognized that there would be a trade-off and a challenge to do all four things at once, so they set the targets appropriately so that we could achieve all of those. We've now embedded that in all our operating planning, governance, and into remuneration. So, our top 1,000 executives are remunerated, a large part of their long-term incentives, on greenhouse gas reduction alongside financial performance. And that makes my job incredibly easy, because we've said this is as important. And frankly, I don't think many other companies of our size.
I was going to say, that sounds pretty unique.
I think it is unique for a company of our size, and that means that we can invest and get behind this and really make progress.
So at these COP meetings, what I think makes these also unique is it brings stakeholders from all different areas, and you have civil society, you have government, you have activists here. There can be a sometimes skepticism of private sector and whether private sector should be part of these conversations, the role they can play in these conversations. So how do you view that skepticism, and what would you say to those skeptics as to why private sector companies like yours should be part of these meetings?
Well, the COP, the Conference of the Parties, is fundamentally about the 200 countries trying to raise their ambition together around mitigating climate change. But the reality is that big companies are as big as countries. Our carbon footprint is just under 30 million tons. That's the same size as Finland. And we're by no means the largest company in the world. There are hundreds, thousands of companies bigger than us who have footprints the size of medium-sized countries. So companies matter. And if we could get the biggest 1,000 companies in the world driving towards net zero, really delivering net zero, it actually wouldn't matter what countries did. Mm-hmm. So you've got to get one or the other moving. So we've either got to get countries moving at a faster pace, and that's a problem, or we've got to get companies moving at a faster pace. So we do matter. Obviously, this meeting is primarily about countries, but we're here to nudge, encourage countries, and we're also here to network and work out and find new solutions to move faster ourselves. So companies really matter.
So you're from the UK originally, and your Prime Minister recently, just the other day, talked about this. This is the finance COP, and all conversations are talking about how we bridge that finance gap. And he mentioned really the role of private sector needing to step up. How are you seeing, beyond Mars, other private sector colleagues, What was maybe some of the barriers holding them back from engaging more, or to the level that maybe you are at Mars?
Well, what are we doing? We operate in 100 and virtually every country in the world. We buy raw materials from more than 100 countries around the world. So our extended supply chain is truly global. So we're investing in all of those supply chains. So I think we're doing our part, and we've got lots of examples we could talk about projects that we're doing around the world. Fundamentally, there needs to be all of industry moving together on this, and everybody's made a net zero commitment, 2040 or 2050. They've made a commitment, but not that many, I would suggest, are actually on track to get to zero, because it's extremely hard. We've been at this for more than 10 years. Our footprint is now minus 16% since our baseline in 2015, while we've grown the top line 60%. So, we've worked out how to decouple our emissions across our entire scope 1, 2 and 3 from our growth. And we've set a very ambitious target of minus 50% by 2030, and we're confident we're going to get there. But you have to do hundreds and hundreds of activities to do that. You have to change everything. The trick we're trying to pull off is to make a Snickers bar or a Pedigree pet food product look, taste the same in 2030, but have half the footprint, and that requires that you change pretty much everything.
And you have a very massive supply chain, which I'm sure includes smallholder farmers and SMEs. So, how are you helping them on this transition?
Yeah, we have about somewhere towards 1 million farmers in our supply chain, and lots of those are smallholder farmers in the developing world. And so we've been doing projects with them for years, raising their incomes, improving their resilience. So projects on vanilla, on rice, on palm, on coconut, on cocoa, where we're trying to help them increase support their livelihoods, both through increasing productivity and the revenue they get from their primary crop, but also develop alternative businesses. We've done hundreds of thousands of VSLA projects now across the world involving women in building their own businesses, saving money. Those are extraordinarily successful. And not only do they empower women, but they create secondary income for the family. So we've got lots of experience with smallholders and how you do that, as well as trying to improve the resilience of the crops they have, because there's an inevitability about climate change now. The planet isn't going to not warm, and as it does, different parts of the world and different agricultural systems will find this very challenging. So we're trying to build resilience into the planting material that they're now using, so they have a better chance of success as the planet warms.
And so doing work in regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture, and what are you doing on the packaging side too, and thinking about creating more sustainable packaging and your whole suite of products?
Yeah, no, and the categories we're in are extremely challenging because we're in small packaged goods, which have been packaged in plastic for the last 30, 40 years. And the reality is that most plastic doesn't get recycled anywhere in the world. So the answers are different by geography. In places like Europe, it's about redesigning our packaging so that it can be recycled because the systems are quite good, and we're on the path to redesign 10,000 packaging items. We've redesigned 2,000 so far, so this is a monumental task. We're taking something that has been optimized over the last 20, 30 years and changing the packaging materials, changing the packaging design so that it can be recycled. The most challenging are emerging markets, where there are very poor systems of collection and virtually no recycling systems. And there we need to look more fundamentally at the format and the type of packaging, because the reality is the infrastructure is not likely to appear in the next 10 years. So those are challenging, and we don't have all the answers to that. The reality is our products don't actually tend to sell into the most rural of communities. Typically, we're selling into more city environments. That's where you start to eat chocolate, frankly. And there is collection. So our leakage into nature is less than you might expect, but it's still extraordinarily challenging. We don't have all the answers to that yet.
Yeah, it's I think something maybe easy to criticize from the outside, and I'm sure when you're in it, there's a lot of trade-offs and hard decisions
because
to make.
The packaging fundamentally preserves the product and allows consumers to enjoy a product that is safe.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about just ESG and some of the political backlash that's happened in recent years, and maybe even in the U.S. We just had an election and expecting an incoming administration that might push even more back on some of these terms. How is that? Does that influence how you think about your work in sustainability, or are you focused on what you're doing?
Not really, interestingly. And our sustainability plan, which we launched in 2017, is called Sustainable Intergeneration. And it was very deliberate because we recognised that this would take a generation to solve. Anybody who says they're going to make their business sustainable in 5 years' time probably doesn't understand the challenge, because you have to change everything. So sustainable intergeneration, means we just take the long-term view, and presidents come and go, governments come and go, and in 20 years' time there'll be a different government in every country in the world. So we have to take a long-term view and just keep doing what we think is right.
So there's a lot of conversation around partnership, and certainly here at COP, because you have stakeholders from different groups that are looking at ways to partner. Can you talk a little bit about the role of partnership and your sustainability work, maybe even share an example or two? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think one of the things that we've all learned over the last 10, 15 years is that in general sustainability is pretty competitive, and we all get there further, faster by working together. So we've been involved in a number of things. So I co-chair the Plastic Waste Coalition of Action within the Consumer Goods Forum. So we've got 35 manufacturers and retailers working together there to tackle this challenge. We've developed golden design rules, so we're all designing our packs to the same set of rules. We've developed policies and protocols around good EPR, extended producer responsibility, and those things, although those have been voluntary, we've now been advocating strongly that they become part of the UN Global Plastics Treaty, which is reaching its final negotiation phase in Busan in 2 weeks' time. So industry, by first working together and voluntarily, is now putting forward proposals to the UN to make mandatory for global treaty. So that's quite impressive, and if we can that treaty comes about and becomes mandatory, then that will drive really increase the pace of change on plastic waste. So I think that's a fantastic example of where the industry coming together can actually drive global change. And then in specific raw materials, we're often partnering. So in cocoa, the industry has been working for years to align on programs and interventions that will tackle some of the challenges. So the Cocoa and Forests Initiative is a good example of everybody aligning on how to stop deforestation in cocoa, and then working together on the human rights challenges, and the child labour monitoring remediation system is another product of industry working together. So you pick a material, and we source more than 100 materials. We're typically working with our peers on the challenges in those supply chains.
How do you see the role of regulation either helping or hindering some of these efforts?
Usually, in most cases, we think regulation is a great idea. because voluntary action only takes you so far. And for example, on plastic, as I'm saying, you can get the biggest companies starting to work together, but if you want tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of companies working on it, at some point you have to regulate and raise the bar for everybody. So we're advocating strongly on plastic waste. We've advocated strongly on deforestation, that we need legislation on that. So I think that's actually probably the best examples of where industry plays a role with government. Mm-hmm. Often it's industry starting first and developing the right answers because they know what works in the real world.
So what are you hoping to see come out of this COP?
Well, I would say I'm ever hopeful that the governments will make progress, and this one is about the finance agenda, but I'm not holding my breath, to be honest. So primarily what I'm doing here is building partnerships with others around it and seeking new ideas. Sustainability is an incredibly difficult challenge. None of us have all the answers. So it's by coming to events like this that you meet different people and different industries and get new ideas. So I hope to go back home with 5 new ideas that I can then apply to our supply chain.
Well, I know we're still early days, but is there one at least that you've heard?
There's some cool tech stuff going on, and we've got we've been doing a lot of work on bringing more and more transparency to our supply chains. And actually this is one of the big challenges of the last 10 years. We all have these extended supply chains that go back through multiple layers of suppliers to all over the world. And historically, there's been very pure transparency of that. And we've reached back, and in cocoa now we know the farms, that we know the mapping of the farms, we know the farmers, we know the kids that go to school. But doing that universally across hundreds of supply chains is still a real challenge for everybody. So there's a lot of tech, and this is where AI will play a role, because you have to join up disparate systems around the world to be able to build this picture of where is it all coming from and where are the impacts and the challenges. So that's I'm always searching for new ideas in that space, and a lot of the big tech companies are here and they're working on that.
Well, Barry, thank you, and hopefully by the end of this week you will have some more ideas to bring back home, and I'd love to catch up with you later on that too. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of This Week in Global Development. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it, or you can leave us a rating or a review. We'd also love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or want to get in touch, you can find me on social media at Raj_Devex, or send an email to podcasts@devex.com. Be sure to sign up for our daily newswire for more of our must-read insider coverage of all things global development.